Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Wednesday, May 27th. It seems like it has taken a really long time to get to the end of May. That being said, any long amount of time it takes to get to the end of a month, if it feels that way, that means I'm probably getting a little bit more done. Yeah, we'll do the 24-hour peak concurrent chart to see what people are playing. People or bots, more likely. In the top numbers, a lot of bots playing games. We may not have any news stories today about the Steam Deck being relaunched at a massive price increase, basically 50% more expensive, really establishing the thought that the Steam machine is going to be $1,000 minimum, and that's probably the bare bones of it. Things are expensive as far as technology and computers, and yeah, the Steam Deck was not going to be this hugely subsidized thing. Although weirdly, I do think Valve could have done that. I just don't see any reason why Valve would have done that. They've never been anything other than a capitalistic, profitable company, and I don't see any reason why they would change their tune and try to build market share. And even right now, in fairness, it's not the time to build market share, because people aren't just even competing against new consoles. So theoretically, when the next Xbox, the next PlayStation, the next Nintendo comes out, I could see then a older Steam machine build going on sale to perhaps try and match those prices. But more than likely, at this rate, the next consoles are just going to be as expensive as the Steam machine is likely going to be, and as the Steam Decks are now. So ultimately, my advice of holding off and not getting a Steam Deck when they were available many months ago may have been wrong, and people should have just pulled the trigger on that. There's still questions. I mean, it really comes down to, do you want to spend too little money when you could have gotten a refurb Steam Deck to get a decent but somewhat underpowered gaming console handheld thing, which I think most people probably would have been happy with? Or do you want to overspend and get something that's more future proof, that's going to potentially be 6 times more powerful than a Steam Deck? And with the economy now, looking at it, I imagine a lot of people would have preferred the compromised older Steam Deck. But yeah, people are screwed at this point. Like, they had lots of opportunities over the past year to get a refurb Steam Deck, LCD or OLED model, or even not get a refurb, just get a new model. And as soon as it went out of stock, that was when it was too late. And now it is marked up, and even if it goes on sale, it's just going to go on sale back down to the price it originally was in the first place. And yeah, I don't know if I can really even justify the markup, because the cheapest models now being $200 more, there is not a $200 difference in RAM. I would almost certainly guess. Because yeah, the argument you're making there is that the original Steam Deck, if you paid $500 for it, $200 of that, or $100 of that was, no, it'd have to be $200 of it. Otherwise, you're marking it up and making a profit again, which they feel like they might be. Yeah, $200 out of $500 being RAM in the Steam Deck before the RAM apocalypse is ridiculous. It's just not realistic to believe that that was the case at all. Of course, it's not just RAM that's in shortage now, it's everything. I did manage to watch, apparently they remade Conan the Barbarian. I'm not sure really why. It felt very much like it was just a worse version of the original and telling, I think, pretty much the same story as the original. And the thing about the remake in particular, for me being an old fogey, is that you just don't get that funness of those old actors. Obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I think Grace Kelly or Gladys Knight was in the Conan the Barbarian. Like, you definitely doubt that they would remake the other Conan movie, and I think there were only two with Arnold Schwarzenegger. The remake did have some topless women, but they were definitely extras in the movie. None of the main characters, at least from what I could see. I was watching an over-the-air censored version, which it was censored enough to kind of not make sense to ever air over the air. But yeah, I imagine the Arnold Schwarzenegger one might have more side boob and nip slips than pure just out there toplessness like the remake does. But it doesn't happen that much either. And yeah, it didn't really feel like the new guy was a barbarian as much. It definitely tried to put more heart and story until probably too modern of a story for something that is supposed to be more of a simplistic swords and sandals type experience, and the fights looked awful. So yeah, I don't know why you'd remake that, but then it seems like they are kind of remaking everything with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, which maybe there's a political reason for that. Maybe there's just the fact that he's really old and he's not going to get back into movies. But yeah, they remade The Running Man. It might also be that just the name recognition is good enough for these movies that they're making remakes. Because had that Conan the Barbarian remake been called something different, I probably would have never bothered to watch it. Speaking of nudity, although actually it's a lot of cheesecake and not really a lot of nudity, I started watching The Chivalrous Knight or something is I think the title on Hulu, and it is interesting to watch an anime like that, one of these new cheesecake lewd with a little bit of nudity animes on Hulu, because it just says mature. This content is designed for a mature audience, and then just gives like no description as to what makes it mature, which that feels like that is really old school. What happened to the, well, I guess because it's a streaming service, it doesn't have to do the whole TV thing, or maybe the whole TV V-chip thing is just not done. In fairness, I don't think I've seen that in a long time, where they would pop up ratings and they would have letters for different things. But yeah, I don't know why you would get rid of that. Let's look at the most wishlisted Steam games there. But yeah, it's basically magic sword users fighting each other once every 2 or 3 episodes, wrapped around a lot of harem. The main protagonist is loved by every anime girl, and every anime girl is throwing themselves at him at an extremely fast rate. I guess I could also say in that anime I don't like the sword fights either. I think we really have dropped the ball, generally speaking, in that we need more Asian martial artist dojos, gyms, things like that to come up with fancy footwork dance moves, which is what a lot of that martial artist kung fu ninja stuff is. When they do a display, it's all scripted, and it's the Eastern version of WWE wrestling. And in a real fight, you would very much not be doing those kinds of ridiculous scheduled things. And that's particularly a big problem with like most of the karate that's taught in the United States, at least, is it is teaching kids to do these dance moves that look like they might do something, but they really don't do anything. And even the breaking over the boards stuff is really a magic trick in that they've pre-scored the boards, and they are super easy to punch and break, and basically broken before the kid even touches them. I have personally broken actual 2x4s with my hands, and thinking that's the way they were doing it. And yeah, you can do it, but you're going to potentially break your hand doing it, and it's not going to happen in one smooth first hit. It takes a lot of force, a lot of strength, more than most kids or even adults would have, and it takes a lot of blows and a lot of a firm foundation holding the backside of a board to prevent it from just bending. But yeah, that's 2x4s also. The actual wood they tend to have people punch, it's much thinner than that. And even if they do the multiple layers thing, I mean, that is just a magician's trick in particular. If there's a gap layer there, then you only have to break, if it's a wide enough gap, you only have to break one thing. So you're only putting in enough force to break the one thing, and once the one thing is broken, it's out of the way and you're breaking the next thing. It doesn't really stack anywhere as much as they pretend like it does. And bricks are pretty brittle, so the whole brick breaking thing is you get cheap bricks, you can pretty well break those just by looking at them wrong. So it's not like they are particularly any stronger than anything else. They're just not designed to be that thing. Yeah. The only martial art that I think really people should learn is probably Krav Maga, because that is a modern martial art, like, that has been designed around modern ideas. It is like grabbing terrorists' machine guns and handguns away from them before getting shot, or getting shot minimally while grabbing guns away from people. It is in a modern world where tasers, knives, and guns exist in a certain way, whereas most of the martial arts exist in the Eastern countries because of laws banning weapons and the carrying of weapons and swords from thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago. Oh, I did watch the new trailer for Hellraiser Revival as I was clearing out, and I actually did quite a decent amount of stuff on my computer in the past 2 days, because I've finished with Blueprints. I am done with it. Now I'm going to have to figure out if I want to go back and play Resident Evil 2 Remake, or if I'm just going to lose that footage and move on to another game. But yeah, the newest trailer is centered around showing how you use the puzzle box, the Lament configuration. In one point you reconfigure it into a completely new shape to solve puzzles, but for the vast majority of the time it is kind of Bioshock-ish. You're using the puzzle box to do horrific magical things to the enemies, to slow them down, to damage them, to hurt them. like forming chains to grab the enemies was one thing, having a spinning blade that you can fling at enemies, grabbing fire from one place and shooting it to another was another thing. And so it does seem like the majority of your gameplay experiences, you're going to be holding the lament configuration in your left hand while holding a gun in the right hand, taking out a lot of souls slash demons in hell, the hell of Hellraiser. One of the hells of Hellraiser. It's my understanding that there's multiple hells in Hellraiser. And at the very end, it looked like Frank, the flayed alive bad guy of the first movie, might be playing a part too. So Revival may very well be bringing back the first group of people from the first movie, which is not a terrible thought. In reality, the feeling and, well, the reality of the situation is that after Hellraiser 3 for sure, the movies that were being labeled as Hellraisers weren't even originally written to be Hellraiser movies, and they were just being made to keep the rights to Hellraiser. Which it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and eventually that company did have a downfall, but not really for that reason. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to sit on the rights of something and have nothing actually in production that you're even working on, because at the very least you could have had writers writing scripts the whole time, just to say, hey, we're not gonna greenlit the script until we think it's perfect and we have the cash for it, but at the very least we're gonna have this script written, ready to go for a movie. And no, they didn't even do that much. So yeah, I'm still fairly hyped about the Hellraiser Revival game. Still absolutely certain, though, that there's just no way I'd be able to make any video footage around it. I did see someone make a video where they were taking just a few frames of the video and going back and forth, making the characters kind of spaz out. Which, yeah, if you're making fun of a video, maybe that would work. Or being highly critical of a video, maybe that would work. But for a video game, that wouldn't really be an accurate portrayal or even a useful portrayal of what's going on. Yeah. It almost seems like at some point we might need to think about a football style play-by-play. Football as an American football or soccer, doesn't matter actually in this case. But yeah, if you just had somebody doing a play-by-play description of what's going on in the game and censoring themselves heavily, maybe that would work on YouTube, but what in the world would that look like too? What we normally see in these kinds of cases is that you'll have like either no video footage and just a reaction camera, or a tiny little box of footage and a reaction camera, and then it will say go over to our Patreon or go over to our Kick website to get the full video footage. But yeah, Kick is still around. It's tiny and perhaps aligned politically in ways that a lot of people would never go and watch it. But yeah, it wasn't a fly-by-night thing. Yeah. But yeah, I lost my train of thought there. What else have I been doing? I'm still working on my slideshow thing. I just don't know why it's failing to check if the checkbox is checked. It should be working, it just isn't. So I need to put some more minutes/hours into that to figure out what the deal is there. It may be that the way I'm doing things is just checking things when it's first created and not checking things later. It may be that you can't just do it using the exact words. That's kind of the problem with JavaScript, is that there are, over time, there's just been this development of too many key phrases and keywords that are too similar to each other. So like you can add an event listener that is change, or you can add an event listener that is clicked. And while that may mean something to people who really need to know the difference between whether it's been changed or whether it's actually been clicked on, for the vast majority of people, changed of any kind is probably good enough, and changed dot clicked probably should have been the way to differentiate what the change actually was, or the change should return a return code for whether it was clicked or whether it was changed because you typed in it or something else changed it. Yeah. If somebody was going to make a new JavaScript, they would probably eliminate a lot of words and simplify the thing as much as possible, since it is supposed to be kind of simple as far as JavaScript goes and HTML. Of course, there's a lot more things you probably can do in JavaScript when you're not using it in a web page and in HTML. I'm still desperately working on my Pokemon slideshow, getting the file names to be recognized by Google Photos. Basically, I think what I've realized is that you have to completely delete and empty the trash in Google Photos of any photo that is the same photo but has a different file name, for it to update the file names, for it to then potentially sort the file names correctly. And in that process also of working on the slideshow in general, I also found one bug, so I went back and corrected that bug, and went ahead using a plugin called Download Them All, was able to make a serialized download list real fast of grabbing the original art for each of the Pokemon, which I had that, and then I deleted it, and there was kind of just no reason to delete it. And let's scroll up here. Definitely think I worked on some other stuff. I finished Blueprints. I tried the dare mode. Definitely feels like you could do the dare mode, but you are just playing the game a second time with dares. Inherently, once you get all the permanent upgrades, dare mode is going to just be easier. But then that might be another 60 hours of playing the game for a really stupid reason. So really you do want to just kind of rush in dare mode. Dare mode only gives you one dare per day, so you can't even beat it until day 5, so you really won't get the 1 hour speedrunning achievement. You really won't get the beat it on day 1. Well, you can't get it on the day 1 speedrunning achievement. The curse mode, where you start with 13 steps instead of usually closer to like 30, is actually more intriguing. First of all, you can't get the permanent upgrade that would give you more steps, but it does really set you up to do just like one thing per day. So you do like one of 4 or 5 things you would need to do to win the game in one day, and then you do another thing the next day if you get lucky, and you're just going to have a whole bunch of failed days in the middle. Definitely getting like the nursery and then a whole bunch of bedrooms would help you. Sleeping in bedrooms, I do think, gives you extra steps for the bedrooms that do give you extra steps when you sleep in them. So if you know all the tricks, curse mode's not anywhere as challenging. Although you may find once you get close to the end there that resources are going to be very tight, since you're losing resources for every non-blue room you draft. But mostly you just draft blue rooms, and eventually that should work out for you. I guess perhaps blue rooms have slightly smaller chance of having items in them. But yeah, there is no reason why I would really want to play more of Blueprints, even in the curse mode. It definitely feels like challenge mode and curse mode should have been unlocked at the beginning, or what I really would have done is I would have had, after getting to room 46, after that first act, I would have had a swim duck plush doll on the starting room table and a cursed idol on the starting room table. And then when you if you chose to pick up the challenge mode, the swim duck doll, then that day's run would be a challenge mode run, where you'd be given probably 4 challenges for just that day. If you chose to pick up the curse idol, then it would be a curse run for that day and that day only, but it would all be in one big save file, and that would just be a way to spice up that day. And I suppose if you picked up both, that would be crazy, so maybe you would make it where you can't carry both, or maybe you let them do both, and then it would just be a really interesting run, certainly. Although, in fairness, if you could win at a curse run, you could probably also avoid all the challenges, because they don't really guarantee to interfere with each other. I'll need to look at the list of all new games on Steam. Yeah. We definitely aren't expecting hardware numbers to shift too much in this next month's setup. When we get this hardware survey, I seriously doubt people had enough money to rush and buy a computer. Of course, I did rush and buy a computer nearly a year ago, and now I have a year-old hardware, which is not a huge problem, but I still haven't gotten around to putting it together. I am also still doing more of that too. I'm just trying to pace myself and not overexert myself and get sick again, but I am doing more cleaning and decluttering. Yeah. But yeah, the real world bills are going up too, and so everybody is struggling. I could certainly solve some of those problems if I got more things done. I definitely want to try and get that done before the end of the year, and I really don't have a good chance of being done by the end of the year. Oh yeah, I mentioned, I think in the last stream, I got my new dehumidifier. I'm still playing with it. Unfortunately, this is true for a lot of smart devices, 2 devices, is the programming doesn't seem to be particularly that great. I had it set up for one while, maybe a day, where you would walk into the bathroom and the fan speed would go to low. It's still pretty noisy at low. Then I tried it where it turned off the dehumidifier when you went in the bathroom and turned it back on when you left the bathroom. That didn't work because all the settings got erased. So the setting to tell it to actually use the pump to drain the tank, the humidity level, all of that unsaved when it was turned off. Maybe there's a standby setting I missed there, but no. So what I'm now testing as a third test is to just change the desired humidity, so when you walk in the bathroom it turns it up to below 80%, like the maximum, which even for a bathroom, if you're above 80% humidity, that would be crazy. But it takes a really long time to cycle, so if you're just wandering into the bathroom for even 10 or 10 minutes, it's gonna still run for 6 or 7 minutes before it turns itself off. So at a certain point it's getting very close to the dehumidifier just always being on and always being noisy, and that noise is definitely the thing that I find most annoying about it. I don't know if it's really using a ton of electricity. I probably should put a meter on it to see. It probably is. Yeah. I would prefer quieter and a little less efficient than perhaps efficient but super noisy. And there really is no guaranteed connection between noisiness and efficiency anyways. But for its main thing, it is getting dehumidity at least out of the bathroom, which then introduces problems and questions about, do I want to try and suck air from a hallway attached to the bathroom by putting a hole in the wall to have a room-to-room transfer vent, which is probably a stupid idea, because even with the door wide open, it's really not getting a ton of airflow. My air conditioner does not have any return registers in any of the bedrooms or anything like that. It only has a return register directly below where the air conditioner unit is, which is kind of in the middle of the house, and so the amount of airflow actually reaching it seems to be pretty low, and the return registers are, as they typically are in houses, at the bottom, not at the top, so humid air rises. So if I was going to grab humid air, there would need to be return registers higher up. Yeah, which there's different ways I could do that. I could put a hole in the wall in the bathroom that would go then directly to a pipe that would then go directly downward to where the return register is. Of course, that stinky bathroom, germy bathroom air might then get cycled even more than you would really want it to. But yeah, I would kind of need to consult somebody who would actually know something about HVACs before I would be willing to do anything at all, to see if it would help any at all. Yeah. And there might very well be a case that once I finally get my bathroom exhaust installed, it might just suck the hot, humid air from the top out and start sucking more from the hallway in, which I think that might be the best way to do things. Yeah, still working on the slideshow here. Done with blueprints. Technically, it says I played 568 hours. I definitely did not do that. I just left it running forever. Speaking of leaving games running, there's actually a new Master Duel thing called, I think, Card Decode. I saw it, which does kind of intrigue me, but I'm not going back to playing Master Duel, so it's kind of pointless too to look at it. So these are all the achievements I got, which is a decent amount of them, and I think the region somewhat reasonable. This one wasn't really reasonable, and even these 40 dartboard puzzles kind of unreasonable. But yeah, full house trophy is kind of hard to do too, but then you get really difficult things that basically only beta testers have done or obsessive people have done. Yeah, and it is interesting how on other pages the number fits in a lot better, and that's probably because of my CSS changing something on that page specifically. But yeah, checkbox still is not really doing anything. I don't know why so many of these pages are scrolled down today. Now I do want to play this librarian tidy up game. I also want to actually schedule some videos on my channel. But I think with the librarian game being $6, it's kind of too expensive. I really should look at games I already have and continue with the backlog and go back to playing older games. Which I guess I'm bearing the lead here in what seems like a just surprise announcement to everyone. They have announced new Witcher 3 content, which to me tells me that probably they are a little short on cash at CD Projekt Red, and they are probably struggling to make Witcher 4 come out on time, so they're probably trying to buy some buffer around that. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually come out and announce that they've just canceled Witcher 4 and that this DLC content was what they had made up until that point. That is an interesting question as far as how many DLCs really were part of sequels that got canceled in secret. Usually, I would say none because of the timing, because the DLCs tend to be announced during the launch windows of games and come out during the launch years of games, not years later. It does give me somewhat of a small excuse to play Witcher 3 on my new computer if I ever get around to building it, but even Witcher 3 had some adult content in it that I don't know if YouTube is really going to be happy, okay with making Witcher 3 content these days. And I don't know if I really want to risk it. In the process, late in the process of playing Blueprints, I had made a advanced scene switcher script, yeah, which is a plugin for OBS, and it lets me press the pause break button, not the print screen button. Unfortunately, can't capture that as the hotkey, and take a screenshot and send it through KD Connect wirelessly to my phone. I updated that to use variables as far as where the screenshots would be saved, and it will automatically create the .bat batch file that it has to run. So if the batch file gets corrupted or changed, it'll recreate it and do a setup the first time, just prompting people to input a path via text, which still could be a problem, because if you put in an invalid path it'll just try again and reset it until you do type in the correct path. I'm still debating whether I want to put that out as a public repository. I'm also debating as far as whether I want to have it on GitHub, or if it's time to move to a different site. This game Citadel has had a sequel since, and it is kind of interesting because it's mostly just a Doom boomer shooter type game, but then it had a level of lewdness to it also, as you might be able to tell from the kind of side boob outfit. But I don't think it was like crazy lewdness, and now honestly you look at all the screenshots here and it's not really even implying it that much. But that did strike me as strange when I first saw it, in that really is just not what you would expect in a Doom game. There were Doom mods back in the day that probably did throw in some sprites of like strippers or topless ladies or something. I'm sure there was a couple of those, but they weren't very prominent. The Barney Doom mod was much more prominent. And yeah, Duke Nukem, I think, really took up that audience quite a bit. As far as if you were looking for strippers, you'd go to Duke Nukem, not Doom. Doom was the pure, we're fighting demons, and this is just pure aggression game. So yeah, you can look at the refurbs here and see it does feel like there has been potentially some price increases going on here for even the refurbs. Just to adjust it, it might not be a full $200 more, and they may very well have not increased the LCD prices much or at all, because I imagine the LCDs are just completely out of stock, with them really not expecting to have any more LCDs. And yeah, that would have definitely been the cheap solution, is to get an LCD. Like 256 LCD was the sweet spot there. Getting a refurbed OLED at this price doesn't really make a lot of sense. Even getting a new OLED Steam Deck at the price doesn't really make a lot of sense. Gaming is going to suffer almost certainly, in that there is going to be a generation of people, of kids, that just aren't going to have anywhere as many games or anywhere as many consoles, and that there's just going to be a lot of people who are either playing on their phones or doing TikTok or something else instead. Yeah, and when kids tend to grow up playing less games, they, I imagine, make that a habit for their life, and so game sales overall 10-20 years from now probably are going to see a pretty big drop off as far as people just not buying games, just not playing them. And that is certainly going to smack directly in the middle of the idea of more and more games being released, or games becoming more and more expensive. I don't know if I mentioned it, but yeah, at any point in the future now, I may get phone calls and just have to drop out. So apologies if that happens. But yeah, it definitely is establishing that even the bare bones unit of the Steam machine is going to be more than $789 US. Now, I would suspect you can expect $999 for the bare bones, no RAM included Steam machine. Maybe no controller included, even with that Steam machine build. And then I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up to like $1,600 to get a reasonable setup. Yeah, and I don't know if there's really a savings to have a bare bones version of the Steam machine unless you already have an NVMe and internal RAM that will work in it and a controller. But yeah, we have hit double the level of craziness of a $500 Switch, in that we now have a $950 1TB OLED, which honestly, when I look at the games people play on the Steam Deck, I don't see a need to have 1 terabyte at all, particularly when you're paying basically $150 more for that NVMe. This probably also reflects a bad design decision in the Steam Deck. I think by far the worst design decision in the Steam Deck is the short lengths of the NVMe slot, where I think it's a 2280, but don't quote me on that, which is like a very rare, very small length of NVMe stick, particularly considering how there is on the backside of every OLED, every Steam Deck, just a great big square there where you could have had a full length NVMe that was much longer connected that way on the back with just a piece of plastic over it and a bit of a bump, or you could have even gone the full length for even longer, and that's definitely what I would have wanted to do. The docking station has also been always overpriced. But yeah, here's a great example of what I'm talking about. So you hold the controller here, your fingers go here. At best, your fingers might go this far. Same side here. So you have on this side, mostly is your CPU fan and battery just all being cooled, hot air being blown out the top. It'd be very easy to have put a bump here in the middle, and in that bump that could have been an extra battery pack attachment, it could have been where the NVMe sat, it could be a mount. There's just really no reason for that thinness, and you could certainly sell it as a stability thing that if somebody accidentally fell on the Steam Deck, pressing in the middle has a high chance of breaking the screen. You really would only need a bump to be about that far out. Could have also certainly had the entire thing be thicker, where the whole thing just kind of bumped out. Yeah, there's totally room there. The Steam Deck is already a pretty big device and pretty heavy. It wouldn't have hurt for it to be a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier. They had already gone much further from what a Switch would have been. So yeah, the bad news is coming as far as the actual price of the Steam machine. The only argument against the idea that the Steam machine is going to be very, very expensive, more than what people wanted, which they've been pretty obvious that it was going to be more than what people wanted, would be that they are raising the prices of the Steam Deck because they're just out of stock of the Steam Deck and they're not making any more Steam Decks, even the OLED models, because they are working on a Steam Deck 2. Yeah. You could potentially sell it that way, but that still doesn't really make a lot of sense because you would then need to announce and release a Steam Deck 2 in a reasonable amount of time. You can't just raise the price and say, hey, don't buy anything for the next 2 to 3 years until we have the Steam Deck 2 ready to go. It kind of feels like, and this would be weird certainly, like maybe they handed over the entire production and manufacturing and delivery of the Steam Deck to a different company because they just wanted to focus on the Steam machine, and that different company immediately needed to take a big cut. So thus the price went up $200. We do not have a price yet for the Steam machine though, so we'll have to wait and see about that. And yeah, while people are still playing the newer games, I don't think they're installing multiple new games at the same time. Binding of Isaac Rebirth still very much staying in the top 100 for games being played on the Steam Deck. The game really goes on forever. I'm surprised people are still playing Vampire Survivors, maybe with the DLC. There's enough variety there, but definitely didn't feel like that. And it is interesting how you have a silent, large audience of Disney Dreamlight Valley players. A lot of these games have their audiences, and they just aren't very vocal or reported on. Still people playing Hogwarts Legacy, for instance. Claire Obscure Expedition 33, I would have thought mostly people would have done with that. But maybe there's some grindier things that can go on forever. Resident Evil 4 Remake is here, but Resident Evil Requiem may not be here. This Zero Parades for Dead Spies seems like it's getting an audience too. There's Resident Evil Requiem White at the bottom. Yeah, Pragmata, Mouse PI for Hire. Let's see, I dragged this game developer article out of the order so we can go ahead and just talk about this news first. At this point, I think Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard was definitely cronyism and corporate protectionism, mostly trying to protect Bobby Kotick as the CEO of Activision Blizzard, and perhaps very much pushed and created as a thing Bobby Kotick was doing to give himself a golden parachute and some more job stability, because it definitely felt like shareholders were getting tired of him and controversies around him. It definitely does not feel like Bobby Kotick's elbow rubbing has paid off for Microsoft in any way. He seems like he does know a lot of political people and other CEOs of other companies, but I don't know if anybody really likes him or not. But yeah, as far as Microsoft, I don't think they've really benefited from the Activision Blizzard merger anywhere as much as they should have, and gamers definitely haven't benefited from that. Sure, we may have some things that wouldn't have happened, like the Diablo 2 expansion Is it a Diablo 2 expansion or is it a Diablo 4 expansion? I think it's a Diablo 2 expansion. But yeah, it feels like the Call of Duty and all the Activision stuff is pretty much the same. And it just feels like most of the skill that was at Activision Blizzard in the past has long since left. But yeah, once again, Microsoft is not benefiting from this deal, as they have agreed to pay $250 million to settle a lawsuit filed by aggrieved Activision Blizzard shareholders. The lawsuit claimed former Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick hurriedly sold the company to avoid the consequences of sexual harassment allegations. Which, yeah, that definitely feels exactly what happened. And I am still not 100% certain that Bobby Kotick has left Activision Blizzard and being owned by Microsoft. He may very well be even more emboldened and entrenched, I guess is a better word. Let's see. I guess it says former Activision Blizzard CEO, but that doesn't mean he actually isn't still getting some kind of paycheck from Microsoft. He may just not be a CEO anymore. You'd be surprised how often, if cronyism is enacted, they could sneak a paycheck to somebody as a consultant or something, or under a pseudonym. And yeah, it's not like shareholders get all the information by any means. It would be easy enough to remove him from the position of CEO and still pay him without really reporting that. Alright, let's move through the Video Games Chronicle articles. Overall, I'm feeling pretty good today, but at any point that could change, and these streams still do tend to go rather long. This was kind of ridiculously announced in that it seemed like it was just updated on the website instead of there being some kind of big event, which perhaps means that they were thinking of having a bigger event and they just didn't have anything else to say, and so they just put it on the post. And weirdly, I think this is getting some Witcher fans hyped again, whereas it has been pretty much a decay cycle of hype around anything Witcher since Witcher 4 itself was announced. I don't know if there was anything they could have really done with Witcher 4 to really get people to stay on its side, but you know, keeping Ciri and not introducing a totally new character, I think, was a big mistake. And yeah, going super heavy female and girl power was probably too much of a mistake to start with. I would say The Witcher, being Geralt of Rivia, has always exerted a fairly large amount of masculine, heteronormative, male gaze energy. And yeah, I don't know how you can switch it to a female protagonist and still make it feel like a Witcher game, or feel specifically like Witcher 3, which is the only Witcher game people really care about. So yeah, The Witcher 3 is getting a third expansion, Songs of the Past, which probably means that there was a second expansion that I can't even name that I totally missed. Because yeah, I know Blood and Wine was one expansion, and I think that was the first expansion. I think for most people, Uh, though, would be very weird to go back and play Witcher 3. Yeah, it's not that old of a game, so it's really not something I would think, oh, now is the time for a full replay for most people. And returning to it, it's also not that new of a game, so you might notice that it feels a little aged prematurely. That is particularly a problem with games that have more realistic art styles, is that you go back a year later and it already looks old compared to what the newest, most expensive games in development are. You do have also a problem as far as storyline goes, and that too much, not that much, can really happen to Geralt of Rivia in an expansion, because it would change the ending of the main game if too much happened. Yeah, I have no idea why my macro put everything down low like this and then scroll back up. X-Forza Horizon devs tease a game reveal around the Sony PlayStation State of Play. Maverick Games looks to set its show debut project next week. This is effectively an announcement for an announcement, so nothing you can really do about that. Let's see. Console and PC players can try Resident Evil Requiem for free from today. A demo for RE9 has been released for PC, Switch 2, PS5, and Xbox. Interesting, certainly. I guess that's a good way to let people make sure it runs on their machines. I think we probably will start to see more demos, but also very much a Japanese mentality in the way that was released, in that the demo is not released until weeks, if not a month, after the game has already come out. So the demo is low priority and really for a second class citizen of gamers who wouldn't have been hyped and pre-ordered the game and played it as it on day one. Which I could see Steam, if they were going to be really controlling, eventually just forcing all games to have demos available, if not before the launch of a game, on day one of a game. And at a certain point, that was the 2 hours, no questions asked refund policy thought. But also, Steam won't just give you refunds for a dozen games every month if you treated them like demos. They'll start questioning things after probably the second or third refund in a month and start asking some questions. Let's see. PlayStation has confirmed the shutdown of an early PS5 exclusive. Destruction All-Stars is now only available offline, and most modes will be gone by November. I don't recognize or remember this game, so probably isn't that big of a loss, but it does highlight a big problem with the game industry in general, that we do have way too many instances like this where live services or server dependent games are getting made for them to then just be shut down permanently. CD Projekt Red announces a Witcher anniversary livestream amid new reports of new DLC on the way. A Witcher livestream will be set for the 10th anniversary of Blood and Wine. So yeah, and it's been 10 years since Blood and Wine, which I guess was the second expansion? Was there one called War of the Roses? Maybe. And that was May 28th. That's tomorrow, is when the live stream happens. So apparently they were going to do a live stream and it leaked out early. And they just confirmed it. It's interesting. It seems to be promoting something called Red Streams, which I assume just is CD Projekt Red. And seems like you don't need your own unique branding for live streaming something. So yeah, I would expect when this stream happens there will be some other announcements happening. And since it is a 10th anniversary announcement thing, they probably should have promoted this and scheduled this at least a month ago. If not 6 months ago or a year ago. And I assume it's going to be positive announcements and not negative announcements. It would be really weird if they came out and said, hey, we canceled Witcher 4 or we've decided to rebuild Witcher 4 completely. It could be a fairly big pivot if all of a sudden Witcher 4 got announced and they showed a trailer where it's Siri and Siri, I don't know, straight up, I don't know how you can get rid of Siri completely from the story when you've already promised her that, but maybe what you do is you have Siri in the trailers we've seen of her so far be actually an old lady, and then there was just flashback sequences in the trailers we saw before, and it's instead her maybe not biological child but spiritual child who is actually going to be the new protagonist. That would be my thought as far as how you could pivot it to get Siri out of the picture by just making her the old lady mother, sending off the child for a new adventure and passing the torch. And then the child could be pick your own gender at that point if you still absolutely want a female character, or it could be just a male child, which I think most people would just pick somebody who's male, somebody you could play as that is just going to make more sense as far as how they're going to interact. There's also vampires being shown here and implied, and I assume that is going to be part of the expansion of Witcher 3 and not Witcher 4 stuff. The cult 16-bit football platformer Soccer Kid is getting a re-release in time for the World Cup. I don't recognize this game. That being said, I don't think I really would have played any kind of soccer games. They're saying it's a Super NES classic. Yeah, I'm still going through GameCube games, playing Wario World, a game I didn't even know existed. But I don't know where I'm going to really find good time to play it. It definitely is encouraging me to stay up in the middle of the night when I really need to be waking up at reasonable hours. This looks very weirdly animated, this commercial, so I would assume that this is a commercial from the 90s. But yeah, I definitely think I'm going to have to get more picky as far as what games to keep and what games to get rid of, as far as just having a really small curation there. In particular, there is a real question about things like Prince of Persia Sounds of Time for the GameCube. Is that version worth keeping versus say, a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 version of the game? Or is comparing the two versions valuable? Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think more about it. In the past, for like NES games and Game Boy games and Super NES games, I have kept same versions or similar versions of, well, no, actually different versions of the same game. Like Aladdin for Sega Genesis is pretty different from Aladdin for the Super NES. And so comparing the two does kind of make some sense. But yeah, I think it becomes less of a real comparison when you start to get to GameCube and later, where the games are for the most part the same and aren't being made by completely different teams. Moving on, Remedy's new CEO says Alan Wake and Control, quote, should have sold more. Honestly, I would be incredibly cautious about ever any CEO who says should have sold more or should anything, because it really just speaks to somebody who is living in a fantasy in their mind more than the reality of the situation, and that a movie and TV deal will help them do that. Do they actually even have a movie and TV deal? It is fairly questionable nowadays, even on streaming services. Let's face it, these are movie / streaming deal, not actual TV. I don't know if there really is a big audience and fans of sci-fi, which is where I would put Control and Alan Wake, enough that doing something like that actually makes any sense at all, and that would help. Yeah. I don't see how Control being shot in live action, even on like Apple TV with huge budget, or Netflix with huge budget, or Prime Video with a smaller budget, would really get that many more people willing to play the game. And while Alan Wake in a lot of ways is inspired by Twin Peaks, I don't know if there really is a streaming or movie audience who really would want to watch the story of a Twin Peaks inspired game like Alan Wake. So yeah, to me this is scary, because it tells me that the new CEO is not living in a reality, and at a certain level I think Remedy in general is just kind of not living in the reality of the situation, where they are culturally just going back to Alan Wake over and over again, just living in the past and not moving towards a more successful feature. The best thing Remedy is possibly doing right now is by making a Control game that plays differently, but they're still putting it in that Control universe, which, okay, but it would be interesting if Remedy just came out with a arcade game, something completely different, something that really wasn't their style. We're seeing certainly the downfall of Bungie lately, for them doing the same thing over and over again, and honestly I just think game companies probably do need a team willing to do something completely different. Like, we're really not seeing a lot of companies like Nintendo, which, in fairness, Nintendo's differences in game development is mostly because they're using second party and third party developers to make most of their games. But yeah, they make a Mario game, then they make a Metroid game, then they make a Zelda game. Those are very different games in their own separate series. They all have that kind of Nintendo style, but it creates a situation where if you're a Mario fan, you can be satisfied. If you're a Metroid fan, you can be satisfied. And if you're a Zelda fan, you can be satisfied. If you're not a first-person shooter fan, Remedy doesn't satisfy you at all. If you're not a sci-fi fan, Remedy doesn't satisfy you at all. If you're not an Alan Wake fan, maybe you're okay playing Control. If you're not a Control fan, maybe you're okay playing Alan Wake. But they are fairly connected. Yeah, and I just don't see real benefit, particularly in video games, to have all of your games connected into one universe and one constant idea. That seems silly. If you're gonna do that, do it for a fighting game where like characters from different universes are all merging together to fight each other. Moving on, June's 3 PlayStation Plus quote free essential monthly games include the Xbox Game Studios game Grounded. Okay. I've heard a lot of people sing the praises of Grounded. And it looks fine as a game, it just doesn't really look that great. Like, I've never heard anybody say it's doing anything that special. It does kind of feel like a game that probably benefits too from having friends play with you. Let's see. The first Metal Gear Solid 4 port footage confirms it's keeping the iPod and Playboy collabs. Modern Metal Gear Solid 4 port is keeping its product placement. Playboy. Yeah, I don't know if there was ever a time where Playboy magazines were actually good or not. I looked at a fairly recent one and it was just full of articles and advertisements selling like liquor and maybe cigarettes, like, and I kind of feel like that is pretty much all Playboy had, and it really didn't emphasize anything other than maybe a centerfold, and there might be a nude lady here or there, but in the entire single magazine it might be 8 pictures, which when you have the internet in modern times, that's not that much, and it's not movement in any way. So yeah, I think in the past that would have been the best you could get, but in modern times, since the internet has existed, it lost any kind of appeal. And here we can see a Playboy image where it's a lady in a bikini. Maybe the bikini was added, and that's just about it. But yeah, you would get more nudity even before Playboy buying art books. This is an hour-long video. Not gonna watch that. Buying art books with nudes or tape trading like VHS beta or real porn even before then. 8mm porn would have given you very old but more nudity. I guess that's why there was also always the meme where parents were more lenient and more likely to let their pubescent teenagers, usually teenage boys, have Playboys, is because it was so milquetoast. It has a level of nudity in it. Although it still did definitely play into that puritanical society of the United States where nudity was treated as something to always take as erotic and something precious and rare to see, which over exoticized nudity by far compared to like public bathing in Asian countries and around the world where seeing nudity was pretty commonplace, and it's only in the actual situations where you might actually get laid that it starts to become eroticized. Moving on, that's little to do with video games. It is a blow in the right direction, I guess, for censorship, in that there wasn't censorship in the Playboys, and there wasn't any effort on Konami's part to redo the iPod into something more modern. Although I don't think really it's a case that Konami actually was pushing back against censorship as much as Konami just didn't care to change anything. And that's the right move anyways with a port, is to just not change anything that doesn't have to be changed. Or if you are improving something, it better be an improvement everybody likes and appreciates. Moving on, with huge queues, Japan's big indie game fest, Bit Summit, just smashed its attendance record. Bit Summit has grown 77% in 2 years. Okay, so maybe it is finally at the point where it is starting to make sense to pay a little bit more attention to Bit Summit. It definitely felt like an event that didn't have too much going on for it. If this is the event hall I'm thinking of, this row here is like one of maybe 7 or 8 rows that is maybe 2 or 3 times as long as what you're seeing in this picture, and that is it. It's just little posters there. It doesn't really feel like Japan probably has huge convention spaces to do. They certainly could build huge convention spaces outside of Tokyo. They've got the room for it. And I don't know if there's been any real announcements. 78 corporate exhibitors for a total of 496 exhibitors, including board games, special devices, and game jams. That's a lot of variety for one event, which might be a problem as it grows, but I guess they're just welcoming everybody as they are growing. I don't know why we're looking at Stardust here. Or Toho Mountain. Let's see, there's a report that Dreams and Little Big Planet studio Media Molecule is developing a new open world IP. Media Molecules were reportedly working on a new open world IP. Why even have a sub headline when it's just literally repeating what the headline says? Somewhat believable, because I wouldn't be surprised if Dreams was a failure. I'm pretty sure it was. And at that point they also, in 2013, they shut different support for Dreams and laid off 15 to 20% of their staff. So they have a different company now, different makeup of employees. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sony owns Little Big Planet's IP and is just not going to greenlit any Little Big Planet thing. If Sony was greenlighting and pushing for a Little Big Planet game, that would be something that could be a system seller to push people to buy a PlayStation, which, with the new potential prices for the Steam machine, the argument for the next PlayStation is back into the conversation to some extent, depending on how expensive the next PlayStation is actually going to be. Yeah, not sure again why we're looking at Utaro Rumono. Let's see. Marvel Rivals has executed an immediate targeted purge after cheating spikes following a weekend update. Marvel Rivals publisher NetEase has banned hundreds of accounts suspected of cheating. which I would assume that means that they put something in the new update that caught those cheaters. Inherently, there is just a lot of cheating that goes on in gaming. And if it's a single player game, nobody cares and nobody really does anything to stop cheating there. I mean, it's almost the player's right at that point, since you're not affecting anybody else other than your own experience. But anything that has a leaderboard, anything that has any form of competition, cheating inherently makes an unfair advantage for the cheaters. That being said, cheating happens outside of video games fairly commonly too, even in professional sports and even in pretty much everything, corporate working, people cheating on taxes, things like that. The truth is, in the real world, if you aren't cheating, you aren't trying hard enough, is a fairly valid way to think. But yeah, there is easier ways to ban people in video games than anything else for cheating. It would be relatively easy just to have a small bit of code in the new newest version of Marvel Rivals and not let any of the older versions of Marvel Rivals connect until they've updated to the newest version, and then anything that connected with some kind of weird old version of Marvel Rivals would be flagged as cheating. And yeah, of course, cheating can mean a lot of different things too, and we have to be somewhat sympathetic if you're just trying to play a game and you want the costume, but then the only way to get the costume is to fork over $100 to the through microtransactions or something like that. Let's be honest, a lot of these microtransaction games, I'm not sure if that includes Marvel Rivals, it probably doesn't, are kind of ridiculous and wanting a ridiculous amount of money. And in the long run, it's easier just to realize that if a game is greedy and it's got ridiculous amounts of microtransactions in it, you're better off just not playing that game and sending a clear message that your money and time is better used somewhere else than sticking with the game and then trying to cheat around the game. Like, I wouldn't play Pokemon TCG Pocket, which we apparently skipped that chart today. Yeah, I don't see a real reason to cheat in Pokemon TCG Pocket. I'm fine with just not getting the elements and the cosmetics that would cost money. Of course, if I was playing Pokemon TCG Pocket right now, I would be a lot more inclined to want to cheat to just catch up. There's a big difference between having an account with 0 cards versus having an account with 11,000 cards. Not as big of a difference as you might think, but a big difference nonetheless. But yeah, Memento Mori definitely could cost you quite a lot as a gacha game. And again, I wouldn't really bother to cheat to try and get in that game. I would just stop playing that game if there was something I felt I was really missing out on as a free-to-play player. And I have cheated in the past on mobile games, the Simpsons Tapped Out game, for instance. And it doesn't really get you anywhere, because most of those games, even if you do have infinite currency, still have a limitation on how much stuff you can get, or you'll just go through all the content and realize it's not that much in the first place. Moving on, let's go through the Gematsu articles. Let's see. Tetris: The Grandmasters 4 Absolute Eye is coming to Switch on June 4th. It's currently available for PC. Not sure what the Grandmasters in particular offers you as far as a Tetris game. It looks like a Tetris game, but it weirdly also has anime girls showing up, which is not something I really would expect. And then it's got some weird backgrounds. Yeah, I don't know if there ever would really be a version of Tetris that I feel like I would need to own or play. Certainly it'd be questionable as far as how much footage I could make. I'm not particularly good at Tetris myself, but even if I was great at it, I don't think that makes more than 20 minutes worth of interesting footage. Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake and Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake shipments and digital sales have topped 4 million. It seems like it would have been easier to phrase that as Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 HD 2D Remake shipments and digital sales topped combined 4 million. But they didn't do it that way because 1 and 2 are actually bundled. Yeah, this is a case where the "and" here is saying that they are bundled, and the "and" here is probably my text rewriting the word AMD into the ampersand, which for most uses AMD and ampersand mean the exact same thing, but not always. Even if it does mean something different, most people are going to not really interpret it as something different. We can see that 3 is mostly positive on Steam. Gmode Archives plus Namco Chronicle launches May 28th in Japan. This is yet another game I don't recognize. Pretty sure it never came out. Here is Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake. And these kinds of fantasy games do have some relevancy, but yeah, for my retro collection for kids, I just don't think giving them any RPG or JRPG game other than Pokemon likely makes any sense. Resident Evil Requiem demo is now available. Play part of the game's early stages. I assume playing the demo does not carry over your progress to the main game, though, so you'd probably end up playing it twice. Sonic Racing Crossworlds Puyo Puyo Content Drop update launches May 27th, which, yeah, that Sonic Racing Crossworlds still seems like a decent experience. Overwhelmingly positive at 96% positivity for Resident Evil Requiem. Which, yeah, instead of going back and playing Resident Evil 3, there is a decent argument to just kind of, or I'm playing Resident Evil 2 remake, aren't I? Just rush or skip straight to the newest Resident Evil games. I'm really far back on Resident Evil games at this point. I would need to play 2 or 3 of them every year for several years to catch up. Sonic Racing Crossworlds, 94% positive. But the number of 24-hour peak players is 527 on PC. This clearly is just not that popular of a game. And maybe that is just a statement on racing games not really being that popular and Mario Kart feeling style type games not being that popular. In fairness, I don't even know if Mario Kart really is that popular. amongst Nintendo fans, or if it is just the case that Mario Kart tends to be the only recognizable racing game on the console, so that's what everybody pivots towards. MLB The Show Mobile is now available if you're interested in Major League Baseball. Veritas Tales, Witch of the Dark Castle launches July 9th. This is a interestingly soft animation style in these characters. Mago Hyper Delicious Edition is coming to the PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, and the Switch in Q4 of 2026. You can see it's rated very positively. It feels like an old Game Boy Color type game, which really just gives me a great opportunity to highlight the problem of old Game Boy Color type games, is that the screen is zoomed in too much. You're barely seeing anything at all. The interface as far as heads-up displays is minimal, which tends to mean that your actual capabilities and things you can do is pretty minimal too. I assume that's pronounced Mago. I don't know how you'd pronounce it otherwise. Let's see. Demio X Dungeons and Dragons Battle Marked Acquisitions Incorporated update is now available. So, not really sure what this is. Dungeons and Dragons plus a game called Demio, and then Acquisitions Incorporated, I think, is that podcast that plays Dungeons and Dragons, which weirdly certainly would be weird if Dungeons and Dragons got supplanted by a podcast of people playing Dungeons and Dragons. It kind of feels like the Demio might be the card-based element here. That doesn't look terrible as a game. It's being reviewed well enough. So I'm going to put this on the wish list. It does just kind of feel like, while this might be a strategy positional placement game with cards, it does seem somewhat manageable. But what I definitely would say is, if I am going to play something like this, it would almost certainly make a lot of sense to play Baldur's Gate 3 first and just really go heavy into the Dungeons and Dragons type stuff. So Demio is its own game. It's apparently been around for 5 years. Probably longer than that. Then Demio Battles. Then Demio Battle Marked. Which Battlemark has been updated to just have the Acquisitions Incorporated standalone thing. Yeah, standalone expansion. Alright, moving on. The PlayStation Plus monthly games lineup for June has been announced. Grounded, Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl 2, Warhammer 40k Dark Tide. The Dragon Quest 40th anniversary update from the Dragon Quest team broadcast is set for May 27th. I imagine that is going to be not too much being announced. It's only going to run 10 minutes. Usually these kinds of announcements from Japanese companies take a lot longer. It is crazy to be able to say 40th anniversary for any video games. But yeah, it's been since 1986. Yep. And when you start to get into these round numbers, I do start to wonder, are most games or any games relevant after being 20 years old? The newest Dragon Quest games still relevant, but are they really creating a tight anchor to push people to want to go and play the older Dragon Quest games, or is there easier entry points? Which you could say Final Fantasy, for instance, might be 30 years old, but you don't need to play too many of the old Final Fantasy games, if any of them. Let's see, Lego Skylands by Paradox Interactive and Persona 4 Revival and more have been rated in Korea. If Lego Skylines is just the Skylines city builder with Lego, I think that would be pretty boring. So I would hope it was something different. But like a Lego tower building simulation game doesn't sound that interesting either. To me, Lego Skylines feels like a game where you're just building buildings out of Lego and trying to go higher and higher. Some kind of like incremental game or something like that. Persona 4 Revival definitely seems like it's just going to be a remaster of Persona 4. And I'm sure that'll be fairly welcomed. I have a lot less to say about that because I imagine it will just sell like hotcakes. Yeah, a Lego themed City Skylines is a weird combination. City Skylines, notoriously one of the games that I really couldn't play too much because I just could not get the screen big enough to read the text on it. That was really before I realized that my eyesight had gotten so bad, but also City Skylines really was designed to have a monitor in front of you, not be laid back and looking at a TV from, at the time it was 10 to 8 feet away from me. I was very much looking at my computer on a TV from across the room. Now I'm looking at it only 3 or 4 feet away and with glasses, so I can read most things now. Yeah, there were some things in like blueprints when you're reading cursive handwriting and tiny things that still was sometimes a little bit hard, but not impossible. I don't know why we're looking at Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy from 2021. Yeah, I have no idea what went wrong with my macro. Normally, the macros scroll down and then they scroll back up. That way the whole page is starting to load. I don't know if that's even really necessary, but in some cases it does seem like it is. Well, let's see. Tevi DLC Fauna Arcana has been announced. I don't recognize a game called Tevi, but I would assume it's Anime Rabbit Girls from the looks of it. Is it a shooting game? Bullet Hell Metroidvania game. Rated very positively. From 2023. And it's getting an update, I think is what the article said, right? All over the place now. Yeah. DLC being added. Interesting. Where am I? Where was I? think it literally put me at the bottom, at the end of my list. Alright, so I have to go all the way to the left of my tabs. And then let's see. I am still trying to get to the point where I'll completely replace my current macros that open all the news articles, so it will be more robust and work. That is going to take a lot of work, and projects I'm working on now are trying to teach me how to finish that project. But clearly it's needed. That being said, I really question if I'm going to get away from using UI Vision completely, because I also need to schedule videos, and I just don't know if I can really use just JavaScript injection to do what needs to be done to manipulate YouTube. Which I did look at YouTube Studio, and I haven't looked at it in a while. It does seem like now I can file like content ID claims, copyright claims. I believe there was a lawsuit that said the fact that they were hiding that feature behind monetized and partner program creators was unfair, advantageous, giving an unfair advantage, and so I believe they have rolled that out for everybody. Still, you would have to have a Google account to use it, so I am not planning at this point. I haven't found anybody stealing my content, and frankly, if somebody was stealing my content, I'd also want to watch with interest to see if they could get more views than me somehow. But yeah, nobody's stealing my content as far as I know, so there's nobody to file a copyright claim on. But it is nice to know the feature is there if it's needed. Let's see. So Gamatsu has a crimey light interview with the producer and director, talking about roguelikes, Alice in Wonderland, and Sins. Yep. Leave it at that. And we talked about the Soccer Kid collection, Dragon Quest VII reimagining, making of video. Every time I'm trying to scroll up, it's doing some other gesture. So I'm getting bounced all around with tabs. This week's Japanese game releases: 007 First Light. Yeah, I'm really surprised that that's just kind of come out. I would have thought that there would have been a more big build up to it. But there is that weirdness that there really is just not a good build up of games coming out. Yeah, maybe I should look at like if GameStop or maybe even Target or Walmart has some kind of video feed that would talk about games a few weeks ahead of it. Because yeah, it is really just very easy to not recognize something is coming out, or for something even huge like 007 to come out with minimal advertisement. Like, I'm kind of still watching Prime Video, so you would think Prime Video would be pushing this game like crazy, and they really aren't. Prime Video does have something new and fairly saccharine sweet that they just released. Seems like perhaps they finally have gotten rid of the boys, and they still are going to do Rising, but I think there is perhaps a desire to go closer to Fallout and further away from Invincible and the boys, and possibly even go fully more family friendly in their originals and things that they're showing. Yeah. Of course, they could just be all over the place. Several other games. Lollipop Chainsaw Repop Switch 2 Edition. Some of these are going to be global, some of these are going to be exclusively launched either early or delayed, a lot of times delayed. And then lots of digital games. Let's see. Here we were, the Dragon Quest, and then Dragon Quest. That brings us to gaming on Linux. The NVIDIA driver 610.43.02 arrives for Linux with Vulkan upgrades, DRM color pipeline API support, fresh new features, all listed in this list below that I don't want to really talk too much about. But high dynamic range is something that we are looking forward to better support in Wayland and Linux in general. That was another thing I'm doing an experiment with as far as my Pokemon slideshow. Instead of having photos actually in order in the slideshow just being controlled by you, it may be advantageous to make animated GIFs. So I went into GIMP and used that photo editor to make an animated GIF, and there was an interesting tutorial I was following to tell it to use better color palettes than what it would normally do. Use an optimized color palette or an index color palette was, I think, the option. So yeah, there is a thought there, because if I took the Pokemon in shadow, then the Pokemon revealed for who's that Pokemon, and made that an animated GIF, then that one file could be randomly selected, and those two frames of those files would still be forever connected. So it wouldn't randomly show you a Pokemon in shadow and then randomly show you a different Pokemon revealed, which would make no sense. And then if I can take that animated GIF and in a batch processing way also add the Pokedex image, then that bundles it all together too. And see, it still, I think that might work and make a lot of sense. It is going to heavily come down to how well Google Photos wants to cooperate, since Google Photos is now the landing base in which I'm trying to do all of this. Some of the images will still be there. Yeah, I effectively have infinite storage on Google Photos, so I can now waste space with duplicates of just the same thing. Because yeah, these photos aren't particularly small, and you have, particularly if you have 1025. And honestly, the website I got the information from, they've added a couple more Pokemon from the new games that have been announced, which I don't see any reason to update until those new games are out, however, and people really know a lot more about them. But yeah, we'll see if animated GIFs work. There is a question, certainly with an animated GIF, in that each frame I can set it up to be 5 seconds long. That seems good enough, but then you can't really change the delay later. Let's see. The Linux and open source getting age checking exemptions could be problematic. The question, I suppose, then is whether DRM management things are going to then say, well, because this is on a Linux operating system and you haven't done the age checking thing, you can't watch YouTube anymore, or you can't log into your bank, or things like that. like it might be worse for Linux in the long run if they get exempt from the age checking. Although I doubt it really would go down that way. I imagine most things wouldn't change at all, and maybe you would have maybe Facebook out of spite not allowing for you to log into their website. And certainly any and everything could happen, so them getting exempted could lead to bigger catastrophes, but that is always the case anyway, so who really cares? Yeah, as I'm stuttering over words, I watched a video with the walrus guy. They always made fun of him like he was a walrus from Mythbusters. Jamie Heineman, yeah, I think is his name, and he stuttered and ummed and awed like crazy for somebody who was on TV for probably 15 years. It is crazy that he never got any better at public speaking. And I wouldn't say that he has like a stutter or anything like that. He's just like and on. And what he was saying really wasn't that deep or thoughtful either. They really kept him on the show just because he probably had some executive producer type credits and had control and more financing in it. But I mean, he really was never camera ready. But yeah, I sat down starting to watch that, and I was kind of excited to see his side of the story and what he would look like and how he would sound these days. And I mean, he was just incredibly unlistenable to. You just couldn't even pay attention to him. Whereas Adam Savage is still very much camera ready and capable of going on a monologue and talking, and pretty much everybody else in the Mythbusters very much camera ready. Most likely, I would imagine Jamie is the genius of the group, and he has great ideas, and he probably speaks a lot better off screen, but yeah, it does show interesting things that you can really be on TV and not improve for years. It has very little to do, it has nothing to do with video games though, so let's move on. Keep goods moving along the rails in a mini puzzler called Upalu Mundi. That's an interesting name. Is it a game I really would want to play? Well, it's on the follow list, and I have to kind of leave it on the follow list anyways. 11 user reviews. It is from January 26. Buying now, I probably should just remove it, as it's just not that relevant. 24-hour peak is 1 person, all-time peak is 5 people. Yeah. This might be an interesting example of, even if Gaming on Linux gives it a bit of a push, which I don't know how many people really read Gaming on Linux articles, it may not be big enough. You'll see games like this also just bundled or giving themselves away for free at way too late after the fact. Yeah, a game like this, unfortunately, it's like day one, you basically need to sell it for 99 cents. Or maybe $1.99 or even $2.99. But 20% discounts, $6.39, I think, is a price that's too high for the visuals you're getting there. And unfortunately, it is almost exclusively the visuals that are a problem here. This might be a really great game, but nobody will ever know. Of course, it might be a very overcomplicated game looking at all of these interface buttons here, too. You can check out the demo for Top Deck Automat, blending auto battlers and deck builders. Which, yeah. I don't know if I really would fall in love with a game that looks like this, but it is on the follow list, so I'll leave it there. World of Tanks Heat released free on Steam and works on Linux and SteamOS. It's a fast-paced, free-to-play, hero-driven tank action game, free to start more than likely. A love letter to the Quake series, free and open source first-person shooter Q2 is out now. Okay. Here's Cry Me Light. Third game with Cry in the name from this publisher, I believe. Yeah. The crying fetish of seeing other people crying and making other people cry, I think, is probably more problematic, if we're going to use that word, to me in my mind, than way more extreme fetishes. There is some red flags certainly in bondage and dominance, in that if you are literally forcing people and taking away their consent and dominating people 24/7 and not just in sexual play, that's a problem, certainly. And there are definitely extremes in sadism and masochism that I just don't think are safe. In particular, like drowning play and many cases of choking play, strangulation play are just not safe at any level. But yeah, the emotional fetish of making someone cry or seeing someone cry does seem to be extremely sadistic. And certainly in all of those extreme fetishes, aftercare is vital, mandatory. As far as, yes, you might have a partner who wants to go to the point that they're crying, but then you also need to afterwards hold them and care for them and be kind to them. Yeah. Of course, that's in real world fetishes too. Animated video game stuff doesn't really count. But I would say be slightly aware of what fetishes you feed and what fetishes you might have. Which that is a weird conversation to have about a game, but that's really where a crying series of games leads me to. Let's see, the Proton Cache OS adds the Proton for Cache OS adds a low latency layer and Discord rich presence support. Which, yeah. Sorry. Excuse me. So yeah, Cache is still getting talked about a lot and really trying to push as much performance as it possibly can do. And yeah, it is fairly believable that there will be a future where a lot of distros are going to be based off some version of Cache OS that is going to be snapshotted, and then from that they are going to build their junk on top of Cache OS, which will slow it down maybe a little bit, but not anywhere as much as being based off of maybe Debian would, with Debian's bases being very old. But yeah, if we also want to talk about bleeding edge, push it until it breaks type setups, apparently HP computers had a Windows mandatory update pushed through Windows Update that totally broke their computers. And people didn't have to do anything to install this BIOS update. I believe it was a BIOS update at all. So HP gave bad code to Microsoft. Microsoft did a bad job of vetting that code and just pushed it along. This is what you get when you have companies that are super focused on firing their talented, experienced programmers and replacing them with AI, taking their eyes off the ball. Although in fairness, Microsoft has been taking his eyes off the ball as far as having skilled veterans work on their operating system for years now. This is the problem with pushing every single person through stack ranking and other management techniques that make no sense to just to constantly move around and constantly try and vie for promotions. Instead of, particularly in Microsoft, you need programmers that are just happy to be associate level programmers or senior level associate programmers. People who do their job, they're happy in their position, they're getting paid well enough, and don't want to move into management or don't want to really have to compete with other people on ridiculous, unimportant metrics. Let's move on. No, I'm going to get into a rant otherwise. Let's see. Blue Archives adds full Steam Deck compatibility and has also added a new startup movie, which is interesting because this is the first article I've ever seen of any game making a startup movie from the Steam Point Shop, which, yeah, it's probably not the first case of startup movies being added. So they want 3,000 points for it, and it seems like that would be that. Now, I will tell you that you can just put in your own startup movies if you want it, and so it is ridiculous to spend 3 points from the point shop to do that. So here's the video of it. It's an anime girl. She clicks on the screen and it goes to the Steam Deck, and then it looks like the one before that was the spooky scary skeletons, an old cartoon, and then Elden Ring Rini. Then we're talking the, I believe, winter sale of, if not last year, maybe the year before. These are all from games. None of the startup screens are particularly that interesting because you only see them when you first boot up your Steam Deck, and you don't see them for that long. They are only there because the boot up sequence takes a while. Way less than Windows takes, but still a while. And that will almost certainly always be the case. A lot of these ones are pretty wild and silly. But yeah. The startup screen that I installed, manually installed, was literally just taking the basic startup screen and taking the sound off. Which, weirdly, that still is a thing that doesn't seem to be capable of happening. You would think it would be easy enough to change a setting in the firmware and have the sound off on the startup screens. But yeah, much like everything in the Point Shop, it's all way too expensive and it's all kind of pointless. It's just useless cosmetics that they're giving away, instead of giving away things that could be sold in the marketplace, as Steam sees the writing on the wall, and that eventually in the future at some point they're going to be legislated away from being able to have the marketplace, and all of those knife skins are going to lose their value. And all that trading is going to go away. I still have a ton of stuff in my inventory, as most people do, trading cards and things that I could probably sell for a few pennies each if I was just going to try and clear out my inventory. But at the end of the day, even having all of that, I probably wouldn't have enough to buy even a single like dollar game. Let's move on. Yeah, here's Blue Archive. It's a microtransaction mobile game, basically. We are starting to see more of the big games come to Steam that would have been on mobile otherwise, and part of that, I think, was a small concern about censorship from Apple and Google. That being said, I don't think you're getting much of a different experience on Steam. You may even be getting a worse experience on Steam. I imagine the cuts for in-app purchases are just about the same between Steam and Apple and Google. I imagine they all take about 30%. Yep. But yeah, for the most part, it is the payment processors that are creating the censorship to a certain level. So any push for censorship on one place that accepts one payment processor is going to be the same push in another place that accepts that same payment processor. And at some point we may get to the point where there is some new payment processor out there, but I don't think it's going to be particularly revolutionary if that happened. Now, I don't think you can buy games with like even Bitcoin or anything like that on Steam, which it would have to be something that is fairly uncontrolled and unmonitored like Bitcoin for you to really get a different experience buying things on stores. And as soon as it was uncontrolled, then governments would probably just make it illegal to use, or the companies themselves would be unwilling to accept it. Moving on, Trials of Mana and Legend of Mana have entered the Good Old Games preservation program with a Square Enix sale. So we definitely have seen the pattern now that they're going to add just a couple of games every few weeks, maybe once a month, to the Good Old Games preservation program, which in general means basically nothing. And then they are going to have a sale and use that announcement of the preservation program as a backdoor way of having a sale and trying to encourage people to buy the games at Good Old Games instead of buying them on Steam. Alright, that's going to bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Let's see, the PS5 exclusive Destruction All Stars has been shut down after 5 years. 5 years is a pretty average run for these online stores. I mean, these online games. We haven't really heard a lot from Tencent recently, so there might be a growing lack of cooperation or desire to work with Tencent that might be happening. Let's see, there's a report that the latest Nintendo Switch 2 production estimates contrast the hardware forecast. The company is reportedly planning to assemble 20 million units during the current fiscal year, a total that exceeds its latest hardware sales forecast. So that is interesting, but explainable, certainly, in that they could be doing one more factory run and putting it in storage for the next fiscal year, because they expect it's going to be even more expensive in the next fiscal year to generate those units. Yeah, that's fairly what I would suspect would be going on. Or maybe they are just planning to hopefully exceed their forecasts themselves, and they're just being conservative in their forecast numbers. Doesn't feel too shady. It'd be a lot more shady if they said they plan on selling 20 million units and then they also said they were only going to build 10 million units, because at that point the forecast is obviously off. Wizards of the Coast has reportedly been issuing letters to employees in an effort to dissuade them from voting to unionize. Quote here is, you could end up with more, the same, or less than you have now. Well, a true statement that would always be true. Not a helpful one. CWA, the Communication Workers of America, once again trying to expand and rebrand themselves as a union organizer, away from being telephone workers, which I suspect there are very few telephone workers around. Is that CWA's fault? Probably not, really. I think Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering and all of those brands and companies all being under the same control has been a great example of disastrous bad management. And certainly, if it's bad management in the case of how they make and sell the games, Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering particularly, it's probably disastrous management on how they treat their employees. So usually I would say every single game company should unionize, but in this case I would definitely say Wizards of the Coast employees should unionize. It almost certainly won't get worse for the employees, and probably won't get worse for the fans of the games that Wizards of the Coast makes. And even if Magic or Dungeons and Dragons did get worse, they were already on a trajectory to get worse anyway, so who cares? Alright, let's go through all the new games on Steam, which this is going to be a disaster. Because every single page here, I'm guessing. Why is that not loaded up? That does make an interesting thought. Maybe if you scroll down fast enough to the pages, the screenshots won't load up and be preloaded, which might save me some RAM, but then creates a terrible bandwidth issue. So that's an issue. Right. So today the system's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to have to just scroll and look at the screenshots at the bottom here, because it's going to take too long, and determine whether a game looks interesting or not. And then if it doesn't look interesting, I'm going to swipe down after swiping up to go back to the top of the page. And if I find it very interesting, I'll put it on the follow list. Have any kind of potential, and then I will swipe to the right, pretending like I'm going to make a YouTube short on it at some point in the future, which that is. something more. I don't think that's anything. Yeah, that is another plot hole thing that I need to basically remake everything from scratch. And at this point, when I get around to it, I don't know if I'm even going to bother to try to do the whole text-to-speech thing, which was the next evolution of the YouTube Shorts, was to implement text-to-speech, reading out the game descriptions. I did see some YouTubers' channels were getting warnings, maybe even banned, for putting out content too fast. Which, I don't know how much too fast is too fast there, but yeah, they are definitely trying to stop low quality, what they call low quality AI slop type stuff, or just slop in general, from flooding the YouTube Shorts feed in particular, while also adding their own AI slop stuff as features, which they are calling high quality. How they define their usage of their software as high quality versus other people's low quality is fairly nebulous. It's basically just, if you use our Google AI, then we like it, and if you are not using the Google AI stuff, then we don't like it. Yeah. I really did do so much on the computer. Just one little tiny project after another. It all kind of fell into place that probably didn't mention one or two things. Yeah. And yeah, this doesn't look like anything. Vast majority of games still look ridiculously low quality. Apparently a couple days ago was supposed to be the second announced release date of GTA 6, so it's been pushed back twice, and I think we are really just a couple of days, I don't even think it's weeks, until we finally are going to have GTA 6 come out. Then it really does become a question as far as whether the people who are interested in playing GTA 6 now are even going to be alive by the time the next GTA game comes out. Because there is just a general assumption that it's going to take them 15 years. It is pretty easy to predict that after GTA 6 comes out, as soon as it looks like there's a decent amount of success, or even if it looks like it's a huge flop, the older number of employees are going to start to announce their retirements. CEOs and upper management, I imagine, will announce their retirement. They might do it after they do some layoffs too, and lay off a whole bunch of older employees too. But yeah, if you were sticking around for, I believe it has been 15 years to get GTA 6 out, if you were sticking around to see that game come out and have your name in the credits, you probably aren't super interested in sticking around another 15 years for the next one, which also I think very much is going to have the next GTA game be fairly different, which is probably a good thing whenever it does come out. It really is just a blinding white light when it's loading the tabs like that. I don't have anything. Yeah, I don't have the screenshot shrinker enabled. That actually didn't ever work. It worked, but it didn't actually save RAM. If anything, it increased RAM. The speed up slideshow has never worked, unfortunately. Realm of Ink is version 1.0. It's rated very positively. I'll go ahead and put that on the wish list. Let's see. Continue to try and just burn through this. Deck building dress up game. It's an interesting concept. It's not very pretty as a concept. Yeah. Suppose for the rest of the day, unless I'm going to get really ambitious and do something physical, which I probably shouldn't do too much of that, I will be trying to play Resident Evil 2 Remake and see how far I can get with that. Also, I'm still having weirdness with my teeth and ordered a mouth guard. Maybe I need like a anti-snoring mouth guard that in general might help with a lot of things. I don't know, I snore too much, but almost certainly anyone who's old enough does. And yeah, I still think it is a case that I just have this twisted sharp tooth and my tongue is just rubbing against it and scraping taste buds off. Saltless decree. Of course, I also have just in general concerns about my teeth and my gums in particular. I think I might have possibly very receding gums, and it doesn't sound like there's really a solution to that. I'm gonna check this later because the screenshots aren't loading. Which faultless cleanup still is another thing on the list as far as I don't know exactly how we would do a faultless cleanup. Suppose what I would do is I'd create a list as a local storage cookie, and in that list there would be specific URLs that would be included, and then if a page is in that list, we would maybe take more actions. We've got another hidden object game. We've started to see quite a decline on these kind of hidden object games too. Or yeah, that's what I call them. I'm gonna give this a chance, even though it's not very visually pretty. Alright, 007 First Light is rated very positively. I think we can go ahead and put that on the wish list. It is interesting how nobody has mentioned that as an article, but I'll probably get an article in the next few days as far as how many units it sold. So yeah, people seem to be fairly positive on it. Even though I kind of don't feel like this is James Bond. That does sound good to me. I could see myself giving it a chance and playing it. There is a thing, certainly, in that thought, that if I was going to play James Bond games, this would basically be the starting point of that. There aren't really any other James Bond games for PC on Steam, I think. So yeah, it seems like all these Empire Earth games are being re-released on Steam. I don't recognize the series, but it definitely looks like old school real-time strategy games, back when real-time strategy games were the type of games that were really popular. It really does go to speak how there was a point there where you had a very different type of gamer playing PC games. Yeah. Obviously there's GoldenEye for Nintendo 64 as far as the James Bond game. And then there was, I think, a Wii James Bond game, even maybe a GameCube James Bond game. But I don't think any of them are particularly relevant enough that you would need to play them and make content around them. So First Light does just put you in this nice position. Then you can cross your fingers and hope that there's just a series of good James Bond games. Although I also have to point out that I very much am of the opinion that really they should probably make a sequel to this First Light and then put it on the back shelf for several years before they even began to think about making any more James Bond things. We never got James Bond Lego games, which is pretty glaringly obvious that there should have been some James Bond Lego games, but Warner Bros. Didn't have the rights to them, to James Bond. If that changed now, this is already mixed. No reason to put it on the follow list. Yeah, I don't think there's anything here worth looking at. Yeah, I do think you could make a James Bond Lego game, but you do run into the real problem of all of the female characters having slurish female anatomy jokes for their names. So yeah, Pussy Galore, for instance, is the most recognizable one of those. So I don't know how you make those characters into Lego minifigs and make it family friendly and then give them names. And yeah, I think that might be the problem there. And I don't know if they really follow that tradition too much anymore. They definitely started to soften it with just the character's last name being Christmas. Yeah. Well, I think that was Christmas Jones, but maybe not. But in that case, they could have a single line of dialogue that could be just edited out as the joke instead of every time the name being mentioned, that being the joke. And yeah, even if you get away from the names. The alcohol, the gambling, the violence around James Bond is still not really family friendly, even more so than Indiana Jones. Yeah, I think it was Red Letter Media that once described Steven Spielberg as a child with a childlike mentality around sexuality, and that's why in Indiana Jones games Indiana Jones movies, you have characters in wedding dresses in the middle of the desert. Whereas the James Bond writer definitely has a more mature mentality and is willing to even let that get into the movies from his books. Is that Ian Filman? I may have the entirely wrong name there. Yeah. Warner Brothers in general still, as far as I know, hasn't really changed at all in their situation. They do potentially are just in the middle of trying to be acquired or just stagnant. And I just question if anything is going to happen to them, or if they are just going to have to, at some point, just go out of business. Wild horse racing. That might be something. At least that's something different. Like, very few horse racing games with actual just horses instead of anime horse girls. There's more of those games on Steam than these games on Steam. I don't think horse racing in general is particularly that popular. Consorts of the Emperor. Wonder if this is a fairly well-known card game. I've never heard of it though, so I'd suspect probably not. Terrible screenshots for that. I am in a weird position with Blueprints in that I am done with the game, but as soon as an update comes out, or as soon as somebody finds something new as far as one of the secrets, I very possibly will get dragged back in, and I don't know of any way to armor myself from that scenario other than just full blackout disconnection. And if I fully disconnect and don't look for any new news around Blueprints, I obviously won't hear about the news, or at least the odds are very low that I would hear about the news. And probably is the best way to do it, is to just leave it to fate that if the news makes it to my ears, then I'll maybe jump back into the game or look up what the new news is. But otherwise, should probably just disconnect from people who are going to talk about Blueprints, because the vast majority of what people are saying about Blueprints at this point is pretty basic stuff compared to what I know. It definitely tends not to be super in-game stuff. By adding a single mouse gesture, going through all the games is effectively taking twice as long, and I definitely don't appreciate that. It almost feels like my code itself may have been changed. So, but I don't know why it would have been changed. It may have been that the mouse was being held down. Or not the mouse, but a key on the keyboard was being held down. Which is believable. I do put my mouse and mouse pad on top of the this looks like AI. Well, I do put it on top of my keyboard, so it is feasible the key was being held down. Here we have Bluey's quest for the golden pin. Bluey games coming out delayed from the biggest peak of the hype around Bluey, but Bluey I think is still fairly popular. That being said, I do kind of wonder if any cartoons are really going to be that relevant in the future. Yeah, and since it's taken so long, I don't think we'll do any follow list cleanup today. Schrodinger's call is already on the following list. We've got some things out of order. And this looks like a player versus player focused type game. I guess I could have made a YouTube short around that one. Too late now. Serpent's Gaze. Yeah. It says end of the show, but still have things opened. So let's hope there's not too many more of those. It does feel like just things are all over the place. I really should have a sit down and think about what does cowboy times really give you in a video game these days. Like you have horse riding, which has never been programmed well, never works well. You have a lack of technology, which might keep things simple. I suppose cowboy times and magical maybe make a little bit more sense. But it would have to be very much an American witchcraft, maybe voodoo type magic. It isn't going to be a Cthulhu-esque or deep fantasy type magic. You wouldn't expect wizards and goblins to appear. And yeah, not much more changes. There's a different kind of architecture, alcohol flowing a little bit more, gambling a little bit more prominent. I don't think it really gives you that much setting something in a cowboy time compared to just setting it in maybe a modern time. Well, guess I'll leave it at that. Certainly it is a case that when you do get a cowboy game, they stand out. What kind of game is this? Visual novel? Yeah, it's a Yuri visual novel. I listened to a YouTube video talking about how mixtape is very close to a visual novel. Wait a minute. For a second there I thought it said I didn't own Alice Madness Returns, and I was very confused about that, and also very confusing that Mina the Hollower is being compared to Alice Madness Returns in the first place. And yeah, definitely feels like the reviews for mixtape are pretty below average. It definitely feels like it gives you a story and very little gameplay. And in the 2 reviews I've seen so far, it does point out that the person heavily involved in the development of Mixtape is a Nepo baby, it seems, and so they were given way more funding than you normally would have, which would explain all the music licensing things. But yeah, the story itself definitely didn't seem like it was particularly good or even made sense. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.